I'm Jesse Hirsch, and welcome to MetaViews. Recorded live in front of an automated audience. And today, we've got a special treat. My old friend Chris Fowler is bringing us the soundtrack for the future. Now, truthfully, neither Chris nor I know what that exactly means. We're gonna make it up on the fly. And Chris, whenever I bring a guest onto the show, I have a format that I like to go through, both as a kind of icebreaker, but also so I kind of develop my own rhythm in terms of how every episode goes. So I like to begin with the news. And I like to start with the news primarily because MetaViews does publish a daily newsletter. And this is called the Future of Authority. And the Future of Authority is kind of a tease on the idea that we're entering into an authoritarian society. And therefore, we have to imagine a future past it because we don't really want to hang out in an authoritarian society. Today's issue of MetaViews looks at a rare moment of synthesis in which we argue that authoritarian nationalism, we're even going to start referring to it as AI nationalism, has become the new thesis in the form of the Trump regime, and that those of us who believe in community, those of us who believe in democracy and concepts of people power, that we're now the antithesis. We're the opposite of that thesis, and we're got to figure out how to bring it all back together. So, Chris, this is where, we like to throw to our guest. Again, kind of off the fly. I usually prefer when our guests have as minimal preparation as possible, ideally none, because
I got none, dude. This is my first podcast. I told you.
Exactly, right? And I'm trying to tap into your intuition, right? I'm trying to get into your gut responses. And in this segment, is there any news that you want to share with our audience? This could be personal news. This could be world news. It could be fake news, as long as you disclose it as such.
I'm not into the fake news thing, to be fair. I would say it's been interesting with the sheer amount of tragedy that's been going on. And I got to keep it large, because I'm a construction guy when it comes right down to it. I've done lots of things. But when you kind of break it, the fires, it's causing an awful lot of people just to go, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And myself included, right? I don't consider myself I don't listen to the news that much. I listen to CBC Radio in the morning a little bit. I listen to 640 in the morning, so I get my traffic. But what it makes me think about is, like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, what can I do about this? And I think I was listening to one of your other ones, and you were talking about people are like, dude, I'm out.
Yeah.
See you in a minute, right? And there's elements of that I feel. And so to kind of go back to the news component, I feel that there's just so much, be it the ceasefire that's just kind of going on, and I don't have much of an opinion on it because I don't pay attention to it, to be fair, so I don't think it's my place. I'm really sad that people are dying. Kids are dying. That disgusts me. But when I think about what I can do and I relate it back to what I do in my daily professional life, things like homelessness, things like housing for people is a huge thing for me. I happen to be making an old age home right now. My mom moved in with us. I didn't tell you that. My mom moved in with us, so she's living on the ground floor. So I'm kind of like self-retirement living for my mom at the house. But I think this is all a function of a lot of things that are happening in society where there's not enough money. My mom's not really comfortable. It's like $6,000-7,000 a month for somebody to stay there. That's insane.
Yeah.
So anyways, I guess my general thing is, with all the craziness that's been going on, it's making me rethink how I want to move forward right now. And it's definitely affecting the way I'm operating right now. And I'm
right on.
Action. I'm
yeah.
I'm making
Well, and this
steps towards that.
And this speaks to why we have this news segment, partly because historically the news industry is all about bad news and good ads, right? They freak you out, they induce you with anxiety, with all the terror in the world, and then the ad comes on, for headache medicine, right? Or for, heartburn or whatever it is. Yeah, right. And it's this natural back and forth versus not only does that turn people off news, but it makes people feel powerless. So we try to start with the news both as a way to say, what's motivating you, right? Why are you doing what you're doing? And to your point about your mom, I think that we are, as a society, going back to intergenerational living as a positive, right? And we're recognizing that it's not just about each one of us for ourselves, but it is about community. It is about family. It is about literally respecting our elders and taking care of our elders. So, that's encouraging. And to your point, I think it's important for us not to get lost in the tragedy, but to find ways, even at your point of building housing, that makes us feel like we're doing something good for it. Because you did say, what the fuck? And that leads to our next segment, which we call
on your face.
yes, we call what's the future, right? In that clip, I wasn't expecting that cat to jump on me. That kind of suggests that the future is not entirely predictable. So, Chris, what future do you see that motivates you, that you think our audience should know? And I say this because we believe in inclusive futurism, right? We are a futurist show, and we kind of believe that anyone can be a futurist because we're all kind of looking at the event horizon and thinking about what's coming next. So Chris, what's motivating you? What do you see when you think about your future?
That's a big walnut, buddy. But so there's a couple things. I mean, I'm going to be 60 next year, right? Something I thought about. I'm not going to be waking up. I'm a 5 a.m.er at work by 6:30. One of the things that happened, I think maybe out of the pandemic, I started developing, I don't know, maybe it's like self-help, self-aware, but my partner, Mary, who went through breast cancer, I developed a salve for her because she was sore from the massage.
Right on. Yeah.
So I called it kind of my hillbilly salve. I've made like 20 different versions over the last 3 years. It's at a point where it's going to go. So for me, there's a couple of things. I like you, we bought a place where I'm at it now. Love our place. I think between the pandemic and just life, I realized, man, maybe I'm just going to disappear into the ether and I'm going to make my own space and I'm just going to be, At the same time, that's not me. I think by nature, I'm a caring, I'm a giver. And so for me, it's like, how can I turn my space here to something that produces, grows? We have a fair bit of acreage, so we want to do some cabinas for friends and stuff like that. But how can I grow this place to help others? Friends that do yoga things. I have a friend that's a professional basketball buddy. He would love to do something here, but we have cabins and things and just retreats. My brother does. It's sort of like you, but it's more coaching, teaching, good, like bringing smart people together, right?
Yeah.
So to as simple as I want to kind of get off grid and not be dependent on the grid. So
yeah.
I have a full solar. So again, speaking to you, because we've been following and talking, I have a full solar system. Not quite set up. I'm a little behind you, but I have 20 solar panels. They're leaning up against the garage, but I have them. I have the full solar system. It's in place, but it's not. I got to get new batteries. So for me, the future is, how do I make myself independent? I can't make the money that I'm making now. It's not realistic because construction, I'm a superintendent where there's no AI that's going to replace me. I'll tell you that straight up.
But it is still hard on the body.
It's a stressful thing,
Yeah.
I think superintendents there's some movie that everybody keeps telling me to watch, and it's about a guy just driving around on the phone, and he's going through a breakup, but the whole time he's talking about a concrete pour. That's like the story of my life. Not that I'm going through a breakup, but like I worry about just building the building. I literally have guys on site today, and I'm, we have a big pour tomorrow, it's super cold. Do we have the heat on? Are we making access and egress? I mean, it's all the little components. But to circle back to what's the future, I think it's me finding that happy balance between music. You know me. I freaking love my music. Um, it's a constant in my life through everything I do. Be it hockey, I'm the guy that brings the radio. Be it I DJ still regularly. 915, you got to come to town. There's a great place around the corner that's opened up. 915 DuPont.
Right on.
Super analog. I play music every day when I'm out in the country, and I make sure that I have speakers everywhere. And I think that it's
Well, and let me cut you off there only because that's a very convenient point for me to segue. Because part of I'm hearing two messages that I really like in terms of your future. One is resilience, right? That you really have to have a lot of agency, hence the desire to be off the grid, the desire to have land, the desire to help, right? Loved ones and friends. And then the other side to that's humanity, to your point about analog, right? Of really being in touch with one's humanity. Now, I like to sort of create a feature for each episode. That's Prez coming in she had found a little nest within an old oak tree. I wanted to sort of get you on that point about music. I thought today, for each guest, I come up with 3 themes, right? And these 3 themes are meant to kind of anchor the conversation. And I thought for you, the 3 themes we'd use is soundtrack, Toronto, and land and freedom, right? Because they speak to a narrative arc both that we have in common. But I wanted to cut you off only to allow you to elaborate, right, on the role that music is playing right now. Because when we talked about the news, I think you were acknowledging kind of the collective angst, right? The collective unease, which for me as an empath, one of the difficulties I had living in Toronto is I felt everybody all the time. And even though I'm living in the country, I can still feel right now the pervasive anxiety, right? This is the day before inauguration as people feel, holy shit, what's going on? So before you even elaborate further on music, the experiment we're going to do today is I'm going to be playing some tunes, kind of a little low level for our audience. Unfortunately, my audio not set up where I can pipe the tunes back to you, but at least you kind of know what the tunes are. So give me a song to start with. If I were to say to you, Chris, I'm really stressed, I'm really anxious, I need a song that both allows me to relax but still keeps me feeling strong in terms of the uphill kind of journey ahead of us. Again, intuitively, what do you got?
Okay, so out the gate, because it's like I would say going back to my roots and something I grew up with. So there's a great story. Roberta Flack, her very first album, First Take. The first song is called Compared to What? If you look at the liner notes, the guy that found her was Les McCann. Les McCann, that's not his song, but he popularized it at the Montreux Jazz Festival with Eddie Harris. Randomly, Eddie Harris was there. He said, hey, man, you want to come play? He goes, yeah. That's the recording if you ever hear that song, that's the recording.
Well, we're listening to it right now. Again, I apologize that we're not able to indulge you in this, but your description and setup is fantastic. So elaborate on the role that music plays in your sanity, right? That it plays in literally establishing a rhythm for your life.
I mean, it's been something that's been a constant in my life, like as long as I can remember. My mom's born and raised in New York. She went to Barnard. She went to Juilliard for piano. So from that, there was always piano. So it was jazz. It was Dave Brubeck and Monk. So that started, and Roberta Flack, because if you listen to those first couple of albums, that's real different from where she ended up going with the R&B and all that kind of thing. But that it's soothing. It's real instruments. It's that first album. Les McCann convinced Ron Carter, who was Miles Davis's bass player, to play bass. So if you listen to that album sonically as best as you can, you listen to it cover to cover is what I usually call like every song, front to back. That album is probably one of the most important albums in my world, but there's so many elements to that album. Trying Times, That's the other one. Trying Times on that album. Reason I wanted to start playing bass was because of that. But to go back to it, I think that there's, in some ways, you almost listen to music kind of like the news. You want to have something in the background.
Yeah.
I do like.
Like an environmental effect.
It's like it's my version of white noise because I can hear it. I do like to hear different tunes. I do like it. I'll sing along if I know the song. I try and listen to stuff that I it isn't always the same. There's a couple of radio stations, a bunch of.
And sorry, what was the other Roberta Flack track you said that got you into the bass or wanted to get you into the bass?
Trying Times, and I think that was very apropos for time right now. And man, listen to her voice. She is a friend of my mom's. Went to the same singing teacher as her in Washington D.C. So I used to wake up. She lived with us when I was in university. I'd wake up to her singing in the kitchen. I was just like, man.
Yeah.
Anyways, but I think going back to it, I think that some people, I do, it doesn't scramble my brain. It's definitely kind of an accompaniment to where I am. I have guys that I bring up to help work on my place here. It just so happens most of them are Mexicans. So I usually play a lot of Latino music, and I'll go on the whatever music app, and I'll go Latin pop. But it's joyful.
Yeah.
You want to. I got to work all day. I'm going to work for 12 hours straight. I want to have something that's kind of driving and going. Am I going to listen to my old school punk rock that I love? Probably not. It'd scare the guys away. But
although
in the country, so nobody really cares, right?
Yeah, let me go back to something you said and just kind of check your preference. You talked about listening to the whole album, right? And there is a difference between the way in which these albums were originally composed, configured, created, and the new algorithmic style of music where you're kind of hearing these songs in a completely different order. What are your thoughts there? Does it change the experience? I assume you're still spinning vinyl and still experiencing the analog. Do you feel that difference? Just describe it for us. Elaborate on that a bit.
It's interesting, I'll say it officially, fuck Spotify. I'm not a Spotify guy.
Yeah. This guarantees this episode
for my music.
Yeah, this episode pretty much guarantees that we won't be on Spotify for this episode, right? That's part of what we're trying to do is put in some music to see which distribution platforms will strike us for copyright and which ones will let us. Because I agree, fuck Spotify. Please continue.
Where the hell was I? You got me thinking about so many things. It's all about music, too.
Analog versus digital.
So you're right. I think I'm of an age too, though, where it was albums, right? And if it wasn't albums, then it turned into CDs. When I was in the 90s, I was the CDs still played the album front to back, like in order. I feel that you're losing, and it's not a bad thing, right? Because some of the algorithms, however they come up, and I know my kids my youngest doesn't use Spotify, but my kids use Spotify, and it's like-minded songs, and it finds it, and they find music. So I'm not against people finding music. I think that's really important. That's one argument that people have had with me about the Spotify thing. It's like, well, I found music. I said, but to go back to the analog thing, did you go and really
immerse oneself?
Did you take the time to learn, right? Like that little story I just told you about Roberta Flack is that she was found by Les McCann, who's a jazz pianist. And, do some people care? They probably don't, Do I? Yeah, okay, I'm almost 60 and I grew up born in the 60s, grew up in the 70s.
I don't think it's an age thing, though. I think young people care, too. It's just we had to put more work into our music. Like, a lot of my personal music experience was CKLN and CIUT, right? And it would be sitting there with the tape recorder.
Cassettes that I recorded.
Exactly.
Recorded.
Right?
And I digitize them now so I can have them.
But the point, it took work. Like, you sat there, right, listening to the show. Like, that was a different form of discovery. And when you got that good mix on the cassette tape, when you had your collection of songs on the cassette tape, that was an accomplishment. And I think the consequence now of how convenient it is to get this music is people aren't always encouraged to do that kind of digging.
And I mean, my boy, the Riley, definitely has, because he plays music. He's actually plays guitar and can sing, and has gone deep back into records. Miles, although a little bit of records, but is dances incredibly, and has found hip hop now, actually, out of all things, modern ballet originally now. But the kid is so immersed in music, and everything, jazz. I am in awe of, and again, the access thing. I don't necessarily disagree with, man. The fact that kids can get access to music that, to me, yeah, I had to work for. I had to go down to Sam's or A&A's and buy the record, and I did that starting in grade 7, I think, because I went to Jesse Ketchum. Every Saturday I would go down with $5, and I would get at least one record, maybe 2, or 45 and something. But I think the lesson in it is that take your time.
Yeah.
Like, there are elements that are worth taking your time in, and if that's a lesson that kind of leaches into the youth in one way or another, and they won't do it all the time, but they'll have a respect for it, I think, is where it comes from. It would be my point.
And this gets to, I think, a piece of wisdom that's kind of emerging in our conversation, which is enjoy the journey. Right? That life is a kind of journey. Exploring music is a kind of journey. And I think it's important to, the Ferris Bueller line of stop and smell the roses, right? To try to enjoy the passage. Now, I want to use that to segue to talk about Toronto. And I have my own selfish reasons of wanting to talk about Toronto. But this is where your and my journey does start to line up in terms of recognizing a need to have a place outside. But before we do that, Mr. Selector, is there a song, again, right off the gut, is there a song that feels like Toronto to you? Right? Is there a song when you hear that song? And it doesn't have to be literal. It can be totally abstract and metaphorical.
The first song that came to me was
Please.
Bus by the Shuffle Demons.
Well, there you go. It is a classic.
It's too easy, right? That was too easy.
Yes. No, that wasn't too easy. That was right on. Right? Because we wanted that intuitive. But while we continue this conversation, and I'm just putting them on now, I'll give you another chance for a Toronto song, so you can allow that to percolate while we listen to Mr. Underhill play sax here with the Shuffle Demons. How are you feeling about Toronto these days? And I said the reason I'm asking is that there's a couple of reasons, but you were just I often forget the extent to which you grew up in Toronto, and the reason I forget this is because you've been around the world, right? Like, you've had a lot of adventures. And you're still there. You're still in Toronto, even though you do have a foot outside of the city. So how are you feeling about Toronto these days, Chris?
It's interesting. So Mary, my partner, and I, we're both Americans, actually. I was born in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Yeah.
But I grew up in downtown Toronto. I came to Toronto when I was 2, and I've always lived on the subway line, along the Bloor subway line. I grew up in Greektown. I've never lived south of College, never lived north of DuPont, west of Dufferin, and Greektown. Oh my God! Oh my God, dude, that just makes me laugh so hard. That's high school. That's high school.
And for folks listening at home, we're watching the Shuffle Demons music video, which is some serious Toronto funk.
Yeah, actually 86. So I was at Ryerson at that time. Anyways, so interesting question. I think Toronto. When you grow up in Toronto and you live in Toronto, I feel like there's a Toronto tax that everybody's willing to live with. Mary mentioned it the other day. Oh, Toronto's. I'm like,
yeah. And lay that out. What do you mean?
So, I've always lived there. So I used to go, I started taking the subway when I was in grade 3, going to school at Vaughan and Bathurst. So grade 3, from Chester subway, get on the subway, go across. Grade 3, dude. Would I do that today? Not a chance. But
I used to do that too. Like grade 3,
but
grade
that's what I'm
4.
saying, like,
Yeah.
at a certain
The
point,
city
like,
was
this is
ours.
this was the 70s, right? This is the mid 70s, right? I started taking the subway across, but there was elements of the city to me that it was still not too big because I'd been lucky. I'd go to New York all the time. My mom was born and raised there, so you go to New York, I'd be like, geez, this is a big fucking city, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And there's people everywhere, and there's no green space. And then you come to Toronto, it's like, well, I don't know, man, there's a park over there, and I can play ball hockey in the laneway. So as more people come, and it starts compressing, and the fact that I'm a builder, and I've built condos and downtown high rises and Costco's and an Apple store and Audi dealership. I've built a lot of different things. With time and the number of people coming in, it's going to get bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So being a city boy, you get used to it. It just means there's more people. It's going to take a little bit longer. But do I absolutely love that I can walk out my door and within 10 to 15 minutes I could be at either a great little cafe, a little bar that's owned by a friend, and I can go and sit and have a coffee or a meeting or whichever. That to me, or dinners, the food, hands down, Toronto. We're so lucky that Toronto has so much food. I think that's just part of it. That's why I call it like the tax.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And
Although
you have to come to terms with that, right?
Although the nature of the tax is you're paying that tax on an ongoing basis, literally in terms of sitting in traffic. But let me ask you a very pointed question. Well, yes, the
changing of who's around you.
Sure, and I also meant that by the empathy. That for me, it's also the tax of just having all these people around you, feeling their feelings, and kind of coexisting with them. But let me ask you a real pointed question, because the price in Toronto has changed, especially the price of property, and you happen to live in what I think is one of the best neighborhoods in Toronto, bar none. Would you buy there today? Would you pay the premium? Because, when you bought your place, when I bought my place, when I lived right next to you, it was still, people didn't know about it. Yeah, it was a dope neighborhood then, but people didn't know, right? So it wasn't priced the way that some other neighborhoods in Toronto were at the time. But now, you're paying a premium to live in a walkable neighborhood. You're paying a premium to live close to TTC. You're paying a premium to have that quality of life. Would you still spend the money to buy there, or would you do as many other people do if they were coming to Toronto now? They're buying more in the suburbs. They're buying more in the outer rings because, again, it's the price of entry. You got to pay a premium to get into some of the older downtown neighborhoods.
I mean, I guess it comes down to financing, right? In the grand scheme of things, we were lucky enough to. Do I have the money now that I could ever do that? Hell no.
Right, me neither.
But if I had the means, to be fair, there's no way I would live in the suburbs. I'm sorry.
Right, sure,
I'm either going straight out to the country, where I am now, about $1.20 outside of the city. Door to door. So if I want to get into the city, it's an hour, just under, and I'm near the 407, or forget the 407 if you don't want to spend the money. Bottom line.
I do. I don't mind spending the money though. For me, life in traffic correlates directly to lifespan, and as crooked and corrupt as the 407 is, I do spend the money. Because when you're coming from you're coming from the side of the city that you and I are both on, it does make sense, right? You're bypassing a lot of mess. No matter what you're spending in money, you are saving that in sanity and in lifespan. So it's a tax, to your point.
I'm towing stuff too a lot of times, so I just don't want to deal with the 401 and the craziness and the sheer volume of drivers. Like it's a little much sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth it, to be honest. To me, if you really are, and that means you want to be in the city, right?
Yes.
it takes a certain person to want to be in the city.
Well, and we're at this point because you made a very compelling argument as to why and I'll still use the language our neighborhood is, again, I think literally one of the best, if not the best neighborhood in the city. I don't think we should name it because, it's like the Instagram effect, right? We don't want more people to know and to spoil. But my point is, like, I reflect on how lucky I was that it was the right time, the right place. To your point, I was lucky to have the right, combination of interest rates and down payment. And when we sold the place, Emily and I were in shock at how much we made in terms of the property difference. But I wouldn't be able to get back in, right? No, that's the paradox.
I think personally that's just a natural evolution. There's no way that you're. My mom grew up at 123rd LaSalle Street in Amsterdam. So
in New York.
In New York, so it's just south at the bottom of Harlem, but it's right by the Red Line. It's right on Amsterdam, so you can get the buses right downtown. Phenomenal area. Like the family owned, basically, it was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment in a co-op, and I was blown away. I was like, why isn't anybody keeping this in the family? It's $1,000 a month, man. Like, do you know how much? Like, don't worry about renting it, or Airbnb was just starting when that all happened. But I was like, I wouldn't want to live like, I'm not a Brooklyn person. I was always in Manhattan. My family was always in the city.
Yeah.
So, and Brooklyn is, I guess, technically in the city. I haven't spent enough time.
And Brooklyn has changed, right?
Well, like, I've been to Brooklyn since. And
yes, yeah. I mean, the Queens has changed too, right? Like, even the Bronx now is starting to change for exactly the reason we're describing, right? That there is this kind of evolution of urban environments. And while, today's conversation is more about the rhythm of life, and not so much urban planning, because we could have a separate urban planning conversation on what's happening in Toronto. Well, and let's since you reacted, let's spend one moment. But before we do, I need that second track. So, what is your second?
I forgot about the track.
Then go to the gut, right? What does the gut tell you in terms of what makes Chris think of Toronto, feel Toronto?
Wow. Hey, look, I got to do the Fu Manchu. I'm like,
yes.
Something from a reggae band called Messenger.
Okay.
Do you remember?
As in Ja?
Messenger.
Yeah.
Messenger, JAA.
Yeah.
So they did that was a classic reggae band in Toronto and around they remember doing concerts, like free concerts in High Park and stuff like that when I was in high school.
Well, and in fact, I'm not sure how much you can see this. What came up was a CBC recording of a live performance.
I think that's at High Park.
There you go.
There was a Rasta sitting in the tree, and he was just doing this the whole game. And he was like right at the very top of the tree during the whole concert. Oh my God. Anyways, yeah, that's High Park. That's Grenadier Pond.
Yeah, right on. Toronto Star Music Festival.
I was there. Anyhow.
Very cool. Very cool.
Again, so going back to the tax, you see, I wouldn't have experienced this if my mom hadn't moved here from, it was reasons why, blah, 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 with my dad and all of that, but why we ended up in Toronto. And I am forever thankful that I grew up in Toronto over, I think it was Iowa was the other spot that we could have been. My dad, late 60s.
Yeah, good score. Yeah. Toronto versus Iowa, you did well.
Do I go teach at U of T, political science, Glendon, or do I go to Iowa, good school or whatever, but it's Iowa, right?
Yeah.
Thank God you came to Canada. And I mean, I think it came to the time. The war was still on. My dad was 25, 26, right? It's like, I'm going to get out of here. So. But I mean, again, and a friend's kid actually said it to me, and I said, I do get to speak from a bit of I don't consider myself rich, but I do get to speak from a place of a bit of privilege compared to most, and that's not lost on me.
Well,
I think that's something that's really important. That you got to understand where you are in in the stratosphere sometimes.
And
It helps you
maybe
have more respect for others, I think, as well.
maybe that's a good transition to, the last pillar of our conversation, which is landed freedom. Because that's how I feel about my current status, that I was lucky to have this place in Toronto, and I was lucky that money in that land in Toronto translated to land here in the country, right? So I'm able to have this farm, and I can't help but feel incredibly privileged at this moment of climate change, at this moment of, fascism rising in the United States, that I got this place. I can grow food, I can raise animals, I can, be kind of one with the universe, right? The weather, the land, the trees. Like I've set up benches across my property where I'm sitting in the same place, but different time of day, different part of the season, and I am literally chatting with the trees. Like, it is phenomenal when you spend time with them over and over and over. It helps if some cannabis is involved, but nonetheless, I feel such a spiritually rewarding performance. Praise Jah, and that's why I'm curious. How did you make that similar decision, right? Like, when did you decide, or when did you and Mary decide, hey, we need a place out in the country to balance out what's going on in the city?
I guess it was. I think it was about 2017, and I decided I personally wanted something. I needed something. So I bought 22 acres up near a little town called Coe Hill, up near Bancroft. 22 acres of bush.
Yeah.
From a no-motor lake on a municipal road, so it was pretty quiet, but I had to put everything. I cleared 2
Yeah.
acres. I put in power. Quick aside, my excavator up there, awesome dude. He's digging. I'm all ready with all my stuff. I want the pole here, and he's like digging, and all of a sudden, boom.
Rock.
And his big rod goes, yeah, that's a big chunk of Canada right there. This is where you're stopping. I just started laughing. I was
Yeah. I love the Canadian Shield, right? Like, that's the same instance here. We have this land because when everyone tried to farm in this area, all they got was rocks. Yeah. And it was like 120 years ago, but there's still the rock fences, because the more they tried to get into the soil, the more they just found rock. It's phenomenal.
Honestly, maybe that's something that my dad always had me on, which was, if I did ever want to get myself some land, I wanted to be on the Canadian Shield.
Yeah.
So few people understand how unique it is, how big it is.
Yes.
And so, granted, we're further south now. I'm not going to get exactly where, but we're south of Peterborough, and we have a beautiful view. We're up on top of a hill. The land here is actually great. It's very loamy, so it's lots of. We can grow probably anything here, and just being this far south, what I notice up in the north is that dude, we'd have snow in May still, right?
Yeah.
So I think, to go back to what it was, there was an element of. It was kind of selfish, to be honest. It was something that I wanted for me. I was starting to tap into I'm a pretty handy guy. I've been a carpenter. I've been a live event guy. I've done a lot of different things, but mostly I'm a builder, and I know how to do concrete. I'm a carpenter, cabinet maker by trade. So the ability to just do stuff. I drive machines because of work, so I'm getting a backhoe. A tractor. We've already had a conversation about a couple of machines. I need my own mill.
Well, and that's where the privilege comes in. There's the privilege of proficiency, right? That you understand these things, whether you're doing it yourself or you're hiring someone, and you know exactly what the specs are and how to communicate it and how to price it. But then there's also the privilege of having access to these things in terms of your industry contacts, right? In terms of your colleagues. And that's where I think, there's, not to get too off track, there's almost a moral responsibility to use it, right? And that's where I think what you're doing is remarkable. Yeah. Like it's kind of a form of leadership where you're not just saying to your peers in the industry, but saying to anyone, look, use what you got and use it as a way that prepares you not just for the future, but to take care of your loved ones, to take care of your friends. And to quickly interject, so Messenger, we've run run its course. So we need a song now for Chris in the bush, right? Or Chris in the country, right? What's the song that you like to listen to while you're out working, either building or dealing with the land or, just enjoying yourself?
God, there's so many.
Again, first that comes to mind.
I know, but that's the problem when you're a DJ and you're a selector. It's just
Yes,
I've already gone
yes.
through 30 songs, dude. I mean,
What was the first? Come on, Chris.
the first was I kept going back to reggae. I went back to
Reggae's great.
Bob, and I was just thinking, could you be loved? Keep it simple,
Right on.
right?
Yeah.
I do believe. Call me. Not to get too political about it, everybody always laughs like, "Oh, Fowler, you ride motorcycles and you live in the country and I have my pal and all that kind of stuff." But yet I'm still a hippie socialist. That's kind of
it's okay. So I've been going through my own transformation as I go from urban Jesse to rural Jesse, and
there at the urban Jesse, dude.
Right,
Fixing your backyard.
well, and not just that, like
I've had that conversation. We saw you with all of your stuff, try to cut your grass.
But like Emily, right, who my ex, who I was with when I lived there, she can't believe that I'm into animals, let alone that I'm in, like, not you, but basic carpentry, right? Let alone basic kind of heavy operation. But my point though is, as I've been going through this transition, I've been exploring some of the cliches, right, of rural living and the cliches. So here's the biggest one I found, and I offer it to you directly in response to what you said. The origin of the word redneck was union organizers in Appalachia wore red scarves around their necks to indicate that they were with the union. And so the reason that rednecks became vilified is because it was too powerful an identity, right? They wanted the redneck to become a villain, to become someone everyone detests, when instead the redneck was the hero. They were the socialists. They were the hippie. They were the ones who were in the mining towns, who were in the forestry towns, who were in these rural communities organizing people for their interests and their needs. So where I also share the hillbilly phrase, because I'm like, yeah, I got my hill. And I ain't going anywhere. I'm also embracing redneck, right? Because, I'm a commie and I'm rural and I'm encouraging people to get back to the land. I got my firearms license and I'm encouraging people to, have that sense of independence and power and agency. So I think redneck actually works in the left-wing rural sense. It just defies conventional logic, but is nonetheless a powerful identity.
That's the name of our biker gang.
What's that?
The Rednecks.
Well, okay, quick, very tiny tangent, and then I want to bring it back briefly to the land of freedom. So Jesse, right, grows up in Toronto, has this Toronto mindset. When the pandemic hits, my first thought, right, was, all right, who are the local criminals? Who are the local thugs? Because, and I don't mean this in the friendly sense, I just mean that, like, in Toronto, where I grew up, it was some Portuguese guys, it was some Italian guys, and they were the real people who ran the neighborhood. So when it happened here, I sort of went to my neighbors. I was like, so, like, who runs the drug trade around here, right? Like, who are the criminals? And again, I ain't judging. I just want to know. And nobody knew. Right? And it was weird that nobody knew, versus in the city, everyone kind of knows. Like, you kind of know who the people in your hood are who, like, run shit and do. Yeah, exactly. So it turned out it was the Hells Angels, and in particular the Quebec Hells Angels. And there had been previously a big conflict between the Ottawa Hells Angels and the Sherbrooke Hells Angels, and the Sherbrooke Hells Angels won. So they were, and then a year later there was a guy just down the road from me who was a prospect who got killed on his property, so this is why most people don't know. It's because they don't want to know, right?
Because safer in the city.
Well, and that's why maybe we won't have a motorcycle gang. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We'll just be friends with motorcycles. Yes.
Go for a ride.
Yes. Although to that point, I actually sold my bike. I don't have any bikes now because I wasn't using it. And the paradox is, I want to get an e-bike, to be honest, and I don't mean like a Toronto e-bike. I mean like a zero.
I'm
Yeah.
right there with you, because when all the fuel, so I'm going old school too with my vehicle. So other than my fancy.
And hold on.
Oh.
But let me use that to spin you right towards it, because I want you to combine two topics. This will be the end of our land and freedom. Let's talk solar. So yes, continue with what you're saying about electric vehicles and segue that into what you're doing as a solar punk.
So interestingly enough, so I've been kind of with my country thing. I've been really getting into older pickups. So, and I'm talking old Fords. I have an 86, I have a 96 diesel. So your battery can run out, and as long as you don't turn the truck off, it won't stop running. There's no computer to go blinky blinky. Your lights won't work, but it'll not stop. So there's an element of simplifying my mechanical thing, and that's also kind of like you. That's my next thing. I know how to build, but I don't know how to do anything mechanical. But the other side is creating my own enough power. So first, it's a survival thing. I want enough power, and I have enough if I get it set
And
in my fridge.
And just to give you context, because unfortunately you can't hear this, I have put on, for this part of the discussion, I've decided to be the selector. I put on Roy Ayers, Everybody Loves the Sunshine.
There you go. He's beautiful. I love him.
Yes. Please continue.
So that I feel that if I want to go full prepper mode, at some point, diesel doesn't spoil. So I actually you'd be proud, I just got myself a couple of diesel storage tanks. So I'm going to hoard a little bit.
Yeah.
And I do want to switch all of my vehicles to diesel. So even my personal smaller vehicle, I'd like to be an older something diesel.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I got my big trucks for moving stuff. And then my tractors and all that are all diesel. But going back to the e-bike, and the whole idea for me is that, okay, at some point, all those resources are going to run out. Probably not in my lifetime, but who knows, right? Everybody goes, oh, the zombie apocalypse. I'm like, no, dude, it's going to be some asshole that's really good on a computer that's going to wipe out our power grid, and I just need to be able to deal.
Right? Yeah.
I'm not worried about zombies coming. I'm not worried about people coming up my driveway and trying to...
And for the record, it's not going to be some asshole. It's going to be AI. The power consumption, the power needs of AI are so intense, they're just going to say, residential customers, fuck you.
Yeah, and that leads back to the solar component, that all I care about is my fridge. So I have a little bit of refrigeration, my pump for my water, the blower for my furnace, but at some point the propane's going to run out, so I actually am angling to get one of those
heat pumps,
a wood boiler for the winter when it's really cold.
Yeah.
So I have generation.
Although have you looked at a heat pump? Because if you're getting power from the sun, those heat pumps are phenomenally efficient.
I have a small one that I can put in here, and then behind me you can see so that goes right down to the basement, and in the basement we have an insert, and that basically, if I really needed to, that can heat the whole house.
Right on.
Not enough insulation here. That's probably my number one thing. I want to rip everything out and re-insulate. Super insulate is really the way to go. That's the builder side of me. But going back to the power thing is, how can I create enough power, even the YouTube videos where you can create something where it's just between wind, kinetic energy that you could pull power off of. Are there enough ways that I can kind of hoard over the next few years that I have all these different things, so that if things do go sideways, I have enough to run my place, and that's a given. I only need one plug. It's the plug that has my Starlink and my internet.
And not to get off topic, how's your electrical skills? I mean, have you picked up enough in terms of the work that you've been doing that you could do, the DIY? You're not wiring up an entire building, but do you feel confident?
I ran my own 200 amp service in the country before, so I don't like doing it because the Sparkies scare me, but at the same time, I'm not afraid of it. So it's, I can do the basic stuff. I've always been able to do the basic stuff, where it's wiring first principles of just turning the power off. Like turn the power off,
Sure.
you're good to go, and
Yeah.
from the source. So that's all first principle stuff that I've always paid attention to. Have I shocked myself and thrown myself across the room? 100%.
Yeah. As have I. It's not, it's not the end of the world though. As long as you're not dealing with industrial voltage, you'll survive.
Exactly. So I think going back to it, there's ways. I think batteries are a big thing.
Yeah.
I'd like to get into some battery technology.
Although I was going to say, you were sort of, when you were talking about the different forms of power generation, there's new forms of batteries, natural batteries that you can do, especially if you have access to different height and different elevation, that you can have, you can have sand-based batteries, water-based batteries, where it's just kinetics, right? You're using a motor to push it all up, and then when you want to have power, it comes down and pushes the motor and generates the power back again. So yeah, there are a lot of interesting stuff, and because I am conscious of time, like I'm too cheap to pay currently for anything like Zoom, so this Google Meet is gonna die in 5 or 10 minutes. What's your learning curve in all this? Like, obviously you're learning tons just from your work, like in just managing sites and being a super, you're naturally through osmosis learning a lot of shit, but that's not necessarily applied to where you are right now. Do you ever run into problems? Do you ever run into challenges where you're like, fuck, I have no idea? How do you handle that? Right? Like, where, as a near 60-year-old, where are you on the learning curve of life, and can old dogs learn new tricks?
Absolutely, dude. I think what you learn is you learn how to research accordingly. I do have a few people that are my mentors. I have a friend of mine from the Cohill, where I had my other place. Cohill, sorry. He's got 600 acres, lives fully off grid, lives in a house you never know. Brilliant dude. He's also my firearms mentor, but he's also my mechanics mentor. He's a guy that took a engine out of a dirt bike and threw in an electric engine. Just
right
to
on.
try it. Didn't work very well, but he's like.
But he learned stuff.
He's hillbillying it, or rednecking it, or whatever you want himself.
Yeah.
He just happens to be. He could be an engineer, although he doesn't have the ticket, but he's got it, right?
Right on.
So I think there's a level of osmosis of people, learned people that have gone ahead of you, and I think that if you're in this world, I mean, I've already done it, and I think we've already had this discussion. Like, I need to come visit you, and we're going to discuss, and we can grow or teach, or both ways, right?
Yeah.
But I'm pretty good at keeping those close. I'm that guy that you never lose. I feel it's important to maintain those relationships. My joie de vivre. I love staying in touch with people. That's part of the traveling around the world. I have friends all over, but you just got to stay in touch with them. You don't take it for granted, right?
Yeah.
But I think that that's also, dare I say, kind of a city mentality. Right? You don't.
Although yes and no. I think
you can live like this in the city. But I'm more of an extrovert, to be fair. Right?
But I think what we're describing here, and this is kind of a good way for us to close, and as I say this, I will give you the one and only lead. I'm going to ask you for a song, so you can start thinking about that song right now. No criteria. But I think what we've been describing today is the emergence of a new culture. It's a culture that is neither urban nor rural, but both. Right? It has the vibe of urban with the courage of rural, right? It has the diversity of urban with the resilience of rural, because there are contradictions in either, but when you cherry pick the best of both, right? When you create a situation in which you've got, to your point, the extroversion of the city, the desire for culture, the desire to engage your world with the DIY ethic of rural, right? Because unfortunately, part of the city is someone else will do it for me. Versus in rural, it really is about doing it yourself. Or if you're bringing other people in, to your point of your mentor, there's a natural cooperation, right? There's a natural kind of community-centric approach, which can happen in the city, but not always, right? The city is about...
bit more genuine out here, to be fair.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a fair thing to say, but it's
No, but it
calling
is.
somebody over. It's hey man, I'm here. I'm going to help you. What do you need?
Yeah, and for me, the thing, like, what I love about where I live now is the friendliness. Even people who otherwise you would hate each other if you were going to talk politics, but there is a certain kind of niceness to it. Although I will confess, and this is true both where I live and in Ottawa, which is the closest city, I drive like a Torontonian, and that does
change.
That does give me a little bit of an advantage against everybody else because they're driving all friendly and nice, and I'm like driving like a pirate. Again, I digress. So, Chris, you got that song ready?
Bill Withers.
Oh, nice.
Let's end it off on a happy.
Yes. But so I was trying to describe this hybrid culture, right? This combination of kind of rural and urban. Care to brainstorm a name for what that culture would be? Because I want to evoke a culture that is like the sum is greater than the parts. So it's not urban versus rural equals like herbal or whatever.
Urban.
Yeah. Yeah, I want it to be something greater, like the synthesis, right? You take the best of urban, the best of rural, right? You blend that into something greater, right? Well, what are we trying to describe here? What are the images that come into your head when I evoke that?
I mean, I think of our 60th birthday next year. I want to have a full DJ party, like, on our property right here for our 60th, which you'd be invited to.
Right on. I mean, to that point, my friend Stroh, high school buddy Stroh, who, grew up in the graffiti scene in Toronto and is an amazing artist. I want him.
I know who he is.
Yeah. I want him to do murals on my drive shed and the barn. So it has.
He's going to do the same here.
Yeah, because I want that urban feel, right? Even though it's country. So keep brainstorming. What are the other attributes of this culture?
Man, it's I love it. I think that there is a tag, there's a stamp that should encapsulate that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's coming to mind right now.
No, but let it meditate. Yeah. We'll have you back on the show. We'll have you back on the show.
We'll make a hat out of it. I can tell you right now.
Right. That could be, how we get back into the city on a much larger scale is a merch empire of selling this rural urban divide. Because here's my dream. If you want me to float, you said this earlier, and I'll bring it around to the end as my kind of utopia. I'd love to have a farm to table shop in Toronto, right? Where we could sell the shit we grow on our property without having to go through Loblaws, right? So it'd be a place on Roncesvalles, or it'd be a place, in Bloor West where they could come in and buy shit direct from the farm, but not any farm, the revolutionary farms. And that would be where this merch potentially would be tied to, a la, Ballerina Farm and that whole social media milieu.
Mine called Fire Horse Farms. Is what
Right on. We're still the Academy of the Impossible here.
There you go. I mean, it's because of our my Chinese heritage, right? And
Yeah.
I was born in '66, and so was Mary, right? So we're Fire Horse Farms.
Right on. Very cool. So we like to end every episode with shout outs, and the point of these shout outs really is to share thoughts of people you're thinking about, let our audience know of folks that they should know about. And ironically, there was one point that there was someone I was thinking about to shout out. I was like, oh yeah, for sure I got to shout them out because we were sort of talking around them, but they've slipped my mind now. So hopefully you got someone to shout out, Chris, so I can remember.
It's interesting. For all this media stuff, I've actually shrunk in my whole media sphere, and I don't do much. I listen to music stuff. I listen to the One podcast. It's really good deep dive on music. The One Song podcast. That's just actually maybe that just is probably perfect. It's about music, and it's a deep dive into music and understanding where shit comes from. And I think you can apply that to many different things in your life, right?
Yeah. And where can people find that again? Say it again.
The One Song Podcast.
The One Song Podcast.
One Song Podcast. Diallo and Luxury, and it's actually brilliant. They break songs down. I'll send you some links. There's some great songs, but they break it down to the stems and stuff like that.
Yeah. It kind of evokes the One Shot Film Festival,
which I still own. OneShotFilmFestival.com.
Right on.
I haven't done anything with it, but you know.
You never know. There's still time. And I'll actually give a shout out to Stro One, partly because we mentioned him already, but he's got a podcast which you might dig, the Beer Hockey Hall of Fame podcast. So it's it's basically a podcast about beer hockey and beer hockey leagues, and he's got the Hall of Fame, the Beer Hockey League Hall of Fame, which again is a trip unto itself. Yeah, so you should definitely hook up with them, only because you guys literally are on the same vibe.
I guarantee we have about 3 or 4 really good friends that we're mutual.
At least.
I've seen his tags too. I know his tags, and I know.
Yeah, right on. All right, Chris, thank you very much. This has been another fantastic episode of MetaViews. Where can people find you, Chris, on the socials and the internets?
Just Instagram. It's Chris Fowler.
Right on. With the H.
Yes.
Very cool.
Fowler.
Right on.
And that's about all I got.
Yeah.
Although, big on it.
For Toronto folks and people headed to Toronto, Chris does promote some of his DJ spots on his Instagram. So that's more reason to connect with Chris on Instagram. So thanks, Chris. This has been, I think, a fantastic episode. And I think you and I both have a task in front of us, which is to try to think of names, rhythms, rhymes that describe this urban-rural fusion that we are living. And the benefit of us describing it is I suspect there's a lot of youngins who are going to follow in our wake, who are going to be like, yeah, that's how I want to live. Right on. So, MetaViews, we publish almost daily these days, although I'm not sure we're going to keep that up. But it's winter, so you got to do something to stay warm. You can hit us up on most socials. I'm Jesse Hirsch, and we'll see everybody soon. All right, take care.